Hi, are you Mr. McMinn?
Yes.
What are you in for? No, I'm joking. I don't ask that question. I would say, hi, I'll show my name badge with my photo, so it's definitely me, and say, I'm Dr. Bunn, I'm one of the GPs.
Lovely. What was your full title with the letters?
BM, BCH, MA, Oxon, MA, DFFP, DTMNH, MRCP, PGCME, MRCGP. Currently I work in prison, so I think it's very important that doctors and healthcare workers introduce themselves so they know who they're talking to and they know which service they're from. So I generally introduce myself with my name badge and say, hi, I'm Dr. Bunn, I'm one of the GPs. Or if I'm doing some substance misuse, sometimes I say, I'm Dr. Bunn, I'm from substance misuse, I'm doing drugs today, just to kind of break the ice a little bit. But that's very important to have a name so that I'm accountable for the service, the patient knows I'm valuing this interaction, it's not an adult-child consultation, but actually I'm introducing myself as another person and they know exactly why I'm there. I've had a funny career in that I started in Cambridge, went off to Oxford for my medical studies. Then I went all around the country to Liverpool and Newcastle, where I lived with James, Aylesbury for A&E. Then I went to Romford. So it's a classic kind of golden circuit. Cambridge, Oxford, Romford, prison. Where did it all go wrong?
I didn't know you lived with James.
Yes, James was a paediatric registrar, and I lived with him when I was a house officer in medicine at the RVI in Newcastle, and I was doing infectious diseases. And when I was struggling with a difficult cannula, I'd ask James, who's good at weeny little cannulas to put into the veins of babies. He would help me with patients who had hepatitis C and were drug addicts and had really difficult veins. So a useful brother to have.
So we got on the same ward?
Not exactly, no, because he deals with small people and I deal with big people. But he was very close by. And Newcastle was an amazing hospital because unlike many places which are very hierarchical, the consultants would come and have lunch with the other staff in a beautiful canteen with crisp white tablecloths, and there'd also be the registrar, the SHO, the houseman, the hospital porter, the nurses, the OTs, all eating together, which is extremely rare these days. And then Newcastle is a fantastic place, and I'm so glad that Sam, my godson, has chosen to study there because it's in the family line and a wonderful place to live. I worked for the cardiologist who also looked after Newcastle United in the glory days of Alan Shearer. And I remember he had 11 ECGs, heart tracings, on his wall. And I said to him, why 11? Why these ones? And I then noticed they're all signed, and it was the ECGs of all the Newcastle United football team. And he asked me to see if I could spot an anomaly. There was one on one footballer. I'm not allowed to divulge which. My medical career started in Aylesbury doing surgery. I got that wrong before. It was surgery in Aylesbury, then infectious diseases in Newcastle, and then I came back to Liverpool to do a diploma in tropical medicine. Then I went to Wickham to do A&E, and then I moved to East London, which is a totally different city to the London I knew of. When I was growing up, London was a place far away from the humble abode of Cricklewood, South Hampstead. And London was where you go to watch a film with surround sound in Leicester Square. And living in London proper, in East London, when I came back, was a very different experience. And so when I was in East London, I was working in Romford, which is just on the outskirts of London. If you think of, Mum grew up in Kent, which she always described as the the garden of England, because it's beautiful gardens, which she still has a passion for. But also it was the kind of breadbasket of England, producing lots of wheat and other vegetables. But I always think of Essex, where I was working in Romford, as being the kind of nasty patio of England, with nasty plastic patio furniture. And I worked there for 2 years, doing general medicine and getting my MRCP. Following that, I was working doing tropical medicine, HIV, microbiology, virology, sexual health. Most interesting 2 years of my life. I'd wake up on a Monday morning and think, yes, today's a work day, which is a rare thing to be able to say and enjoy. And I worked with Chris Whitty, who gave me a mock interview for my next job, which was down in Bristol as a clinical lecturer in infection, which is a very fancy title for an extremely boring job. There's a joke, how do you tell you're talking to an extrovert microbiologist? And the answer is, he's the one who's talking to your shoes and not his own. And it was that kind of environment in the lab. It was not very, after the kind of diversity and the colour of London, where my patients were reporters who had been out and got leishmaniasis in a war zone, or people with HIV, haemophiliacs who had got HIV, African migrants who had collapsed at Heathrow Airport on the way somewhere else and had shock TB lung and HIV and CMV encephalitis, really rare diseases and interesting combinations and interesting socio-political dimensions. Going from there to Bristol was a bit of a shock. I love Bristol. I'm, again, so delighted that Josh discovered it and probably enjoyed it a bit more, because he's a bit more of a creative than me, down in the mild west. But I had a wonderful church, which Josh went to later, and it was lovely to be on the coast again, because, again, another family interest has been sailing, which I got to do a little bit down there. But it was a horrible year, my annus horribilis, to quote the Queen, and I jacked it in after a few months and went to Bible college in a place called All Nations Christian College, where I studied missiology and biblical studies. And it was an incredible course, because it wasn't just your typical course where you study the thoughts of dead white men, generally Germans from the 19th century theologians who were talking about very niche philosophical problems and answering critiques of faith from a very kind of modernist, skeptical perspective. This college was all about, how does faith work? How do we show its relevance? How do we serve the people? How do we love our neighbours in often very diverse places? Like my friends went to Mongolia and Siberia and to Peru. How do you serve your people? So a lot of the class would go from a class looking at how the Bible was put together, the oral tradition and the translations and the cultures that informed it, to a workshop on making papier-mâché furniture, or dentistry, or hairdressing, or how to send a prayer letter, or how to mend your motorcycle. And that was a fantastic, very broad, holistic experience of understanding how God is at work in his world, and how he works through us, and where he wants to take the world to, and include people from all nations, hence the name, every tribe and tongue, gathered up into the renewed and healed creation to come. And it was as much about the people as it was the study. I had amazing role models there who were just far less interested in their pension or what car they're driving, but how could they use their gifts, their unique gifts, fan them into flames to serve their neighbour. So that was a really wonderful 2 years out. But being a bit of a workaholic, I also in the second year worked in a hospice in Romford and took up a master's in bioethics. So I was doing 2 academic degrees at the same time as working in palliative care, which was quite a tough year. And then eventually I decided to quit medicine altogether and become a GP. So people often say this is a lifestyle choice. It's more than that. It's also, I like what Mary Bunn says, that many people are specialists in the heart or the brain or the ear or the eye. And as a GP, you are aspiring to be a specialist in people. And that's one of the reasons I went into medicine, inspired by my dad and my mum and my siblings, to inquire more about what it means to be human and to see people in their time of need and to serve them through medicine. So I then went back to Essex, to Chingford, and trained as a GP. And once I'd qualified as a GP and finally got my qualification, there was a slight gap there, so I applied for jobs in McDonald's to try and shame the college into kind of processing my paperwork a bit more quickly. I then became a GP in the East End and eventually became a prison GP.
How did that come about, prison GP? Why did you decide to become a prison GP?
Why did I become a prison GP? Good question. It's not exactly something people aspire to when they're applying to medical school or doing their A-levels, or when I was in Cambridge. People would often joke about going to prison, but only for making a catastrophic mistake. You know, Alex, you need to get that blood test result back to us in half an hour, otherwise it could end in prison. But I became a prison doctor because one day I saw a locum, and purely out of, I think, voyeurism and curiosity, more positively, I thought that'd be interesting. So I went there for a day, and it was a bit grim, but I realized that most of the patients there were genuinely in need and hadn't engaged with health services before, were often very broken from childhood experiences, often in a place of great spiritual need and really looking for answers to questions like, can I be forgiven? Do I belong? Am I lovable? Is there hope and purpose just in the day-to-day life, and how can I create a future for myself? And I found that mix of hardcore medicine, of looking after people who are quite sick and often don't know it, with the sociological angle of people from very diverse backgrounds. We have 40% of our patients are from abroad, are foreign nationals, speaking a variety of languages, with the whole gamut of class and race, gender identity, and how to coordinate that, both organisationally and individually, how to approach their individual needs, but also that kind of more, if you like, spiritual and political angle of how we help people back on their feet. And what's the purpose of prison? Is it merely to punish, or is it to rehabilitate people and help them lead the best lives they can on release from prison? So I find that incredibly rewarding. And I would say that I had quite a difficult journey through medicine, trying to find what my niche was. I had friends who very quickly settled into dermatology because they quite liked knocking off at 5 o'clock, or people who did cardiothoracic surgery, partly because of the interest of the intricacy of surgery, but also because of massive private practice. I always thought I'd be a medical missionary. And I learned from hard experience that was more of an ambition in some ways than a calling. I couldn't do what James has done and live, James and Mary, live somewhere quite rural and remote. I'm still very much someone who likes to be in a city with a buzz around me. And I've learned that actually I can serve where I am. But I didn't realize until one of my friends said, Alex, which career are you going to jack in next? And I found that quite a hard question. But looking back, I've discovered that all the jobs I've done have actually prepared me to be where I am now. And I think sometimes you only discover calling in retrospect, that the medical ethics, the infectious diseases, the geriatrics, the biblical studies and spiritual care, the palliative care, all those jobs have really qualified me in a way that I wouldn't have chosen if I thought, do you know, I'm going to be a GP or I'm going to end up there. So I'm immensely glad for that rich training I've had that has, looking back, led me to this place. I think the Bible says that, Psalm 119 says that God's word is a light to our path and a lamp for our feet, but it's not a spotlight for the horizon telling us where we're going to be years down the line. It gives us just enough to take the next step on that path, and if we're faithful in the small things, God can lead us to the place where he wants us and the place where we're most using our gifts to take the world forward and to serve God and our neighbour. Where do I see my career going in the future? Yeah, I think following on from what I've just said, I don't plan many years ahead. I've learned from several in the family that it's good just to enjoy your current situation, and who knows, I think the current way of careers is you don't do anything for more than 5 years or so. Actually, I've been in prison now as a doctor for 10 years, which is quite a long time really, and many people find that's quite enough. It's quite intense. I often say to people that that prison work can be a riot, some days quite literally, and I've seen those in my place of work in HMP Wandsworth. But I think that one of the beauties of medicine is that it's so diverse. There's a place for everyone. And I could well see myself moving sideways again at some point into more management and leadership, more teaching, more research. And so I'm still Alex in development. I'm still in progress on that one, but I have plenty of options. I think medicine piqued my interest when I was around the Sunday lunch table with Dad just having carved the roast beautifully that Mum had spent hours and hours cooking and sweating over. Not too much sweat, I hope. With the usual 5 vegetables and 3 desserts. And all the family talking about various aspects of what we learned from books. But Dad would come up with stories from his study of people. And he'd always have some interesting insight into why people do what they do, why someone would be at the end of our garden path, sitting there waiting for Dad to come home, what they were wanting from him. Was it some human connection? Was it just a pill to deal with a particular medical problem? But just understanding people and why medicine is not as simple as a computer algorithm. Google tells you the diagnosis, you get a blood test to look for a rare gene, and you give a medication. But it's far more about people and what drives us. Each of us individually is more interested, I think, in adding life to our years than just years to our life. So often medicine tells you you need to give someone's a pill for their cholesterol or monitor their blood pressure or their weight. But actually people are often more interested in how do I cope with a relationship breakdown, or how do I get the best sports shoes for my funny shaped feet, or how do I keep myself fit for that triathlon I'm doing, or how do I, all manner of different things which are far more about the day-to-day and less about the things that medicine is interested in. There's a saying in medicine, if you can't score it, ignore it. And medicine has become a lot more technical and a lot more about the numbers, about adding years to life rather than life to years. So I'm really proud to be part of a family that is as much as interested in embracing all of what life has to offer, with the bouldering and the cooking and art and I think those things are just as important in terms of quality of life, and medicine is only latterly realising that social prescribing and thinking about what does it mean to flourish as a human being is far more about relationship and well-being than merely what number your blood pressure scores or your cholesterol scores. So I'm very encouraged by that development. The problem with careers in the Bunn family is we have this autosomal dominant gene called the medical gene, which means that 9 out of the 11 of the nuclear family are involved in some kind of medical thing. And I take my hat off to those who have broken away and done something quite brave, particularly the grandchildren who have done languages and art and maths and business studies, because I think that's quite brave if you haven't got role models. You know, this thing about if you can see it, you can be it. Well, I didn't know anyone who wasn't medical growing up. So in many ways, it wasn't a free choice as much as any choice is free, because I had that huge advantage of knowing what medicine's going to be like, that my destination, being able to plan my route through that, and fantastic tutorials from Dad on science. Dad was very, very methodical, very, very methodical on showing while you're working. So I had to choose which questions to ask Dad, so I didn't stay up till 2 in the morning. But it was a great opportunity to flourish in the sciences. Mum brought a bit more of the humanities. Mum was an avid reader and introduced me to literature, although I was a very slow reader and a late developer in many ways. But I'm really struggling to think what I would be. But I'm a person. I'm shaped very much by my family and my schooling, which was very much about aspiring for one of those careers that is well recognised and respected. I wouldn't have the confidence, I think, to have done something a bit more creative. So the most creative I get is working with Messy Church, making kind of fun candles, and working with Danny's helped me with Messy Church, and I've enjoyed those little creative flourishes. But I know I would never be good enough to make a career out of that. I think one of the nice things about my childhood was, although I was quite bookish, my siblings and my parents were always wanting to explore new territory. So James in particular would always come back from his holiday wearing a dodgy Peruvian pullover and give me a little toy from Peru and some wonderful chocolate, and it opened my eyes and my ears and my mouth to the wider world, which I then explored greatly in my year off. And Dad was again a man of the land from Norfolk. He loved using his hands to make things. I remember he would finish surgery at 7 o'clock in the evening, 8 o'clock, and he'd go straight to the allotment, because you could buy potatoes very cheaply from Waitrose, but he wanted to grow his own. And I think I learned that love of seeing things develop that you have poured yourself into, and enjoyed the craft around understanding why this plant grows in this place and what parasites might attack it. And Mum would take it on and think about what we do with these gooseberries. There was a wonderful adventure in making things with our hands, and Mum alongside Dad with her gardening. So if I retired and had another career, I'd love to do more in that area of gardening, cooking, decorating, and making things with my hands, just like my parents have. Date today is the 27th. I've written for Josh McMinn, no relation. This sick note's for 2 weeks. Josh is suffering lumbago from over-enthusiastic trampolining. Dr. A. Bunn, GMC 4332642. We all memorise our GMC numbers for this kind of eventuality.
Why do you always say no relation if we go out? And why do you always want to keep it away from me?